I'm quilting another ABC 123 quilt, and I am going to use my ABC stencil. This is Alignable Block Collection, and this is a graphic spiral, I think it's called. I'll have it in the notes below the video. I have drawn a straight line down the middle of each of the background sections. I just used a basic blue marker for this. So just a basic blue marker, and found a line down the middle of it. And I'm now going to line the center of the stencil up on the center line. I'm going to take out my blue pounce pad. I typically use a barely blue pad, but this is blue because I want you to be able to see it on the video. Swipe, and I'm going to move it down on the line again. Swipe, and I could either mark all of them on this one column before I stitch, or I can stitch one and mark one and stitch one and mark one. The danger of doing all of them at once is the ones on the bottom could wear off before I get there, but it's also kind of annoying to have to do this after every one. So pick one. It's not the most fun thing ever, but it's easier than actually drawing all of this in. So I'm ready to stitch. I have Pansy, a multicolor 50 weight cotton thread in my needle, and then I have an 80 weight pink solid in my bobbin. It's a 80 weight polyester in the bobbin, 50 weight cotton in the top, and this will be lovely. I also have my Batt Scooters, which I'll have here to help me move the quilt around. And I have the quilt all fluffed up in my lap. So I'm starting in the center top of my quilt and coming down this row, this column, and I'll continue that on the columns going out to the right. I will have to remember whenever I am stitching the other side to reverse the stencil so that they're going in the same way all the way across the quilt. I don't want to have half my quilt upside down. So the first thing I'm doing here is basting across the top. Then I will start stitching and follow the line. Following the line is not as scary as it sounds because the line is going to go away. If it doesn't go away while I'm quilting, I can rub it off with microfiber cloth or throw it in the washing machine when I'm done. Because I do have a blue line on here that needs to come off with water, and then I'll have the blue powder on here. I can pause here, make my plan for where I'm going next. I'm going to stitch down to the beginning of my next spiral and quilt that one. Now I'm going to pause here and mark my next spiral. pause again to mark my next spiral. And I'm going to continue quilting like that all the way down my quilt. I finished swirling all the way down. I basted across the bottom, and now I'm going to work my way back up to the top again. I'm going to do some background stitching because I don't want to have all of this unquilted area. I like the look of the pansy thread on the background. The pansy thread is pink, lavender, and yellow, and it's just lovely. So also using my free motion foot with my feed dogs down, I am going to do switchbacks, just back and forth, in and out of the spaces. I'm kind of measuring those switchbacks based on my foot. Now, the switchbacks are a little larger than the foot, and that's the size I want them, but they are free motion. They aren't going to be even. There's nowhere to stop on this like there was in the spiral, stopping in the point. But what I can do is whenever I need to stop, I tend to stop close to that seam over there so that I don't have if there's a little bubble when I restart, it doesn't happen closer, toward the middle of the fabric. I stop when I need to reposition my hands or breathe. If you're someone who holds your breath while you quilt, we recommend breathing. So I finished all of the switchback stitching on one side of my swirls. I'm going to work my way back up to the top. If you're looking as I scroll, you can see that they are not even. They're not perfect, but they are filling the background nicely. So now I'm back up at the top, ready to start my next row, my next stitching. Now, while I'm stitching the stitching on this side of the swirl, what I'm not doing is worrying if there's the same number of swirls on the left side of the swirl as there are on the right side. I don't care. I'm not looking over there. They don't need to match. It's just filling the background, and no one will really notice. So I finished this entire column of swirls and background quilting, and it's already beautiful, but it's going to be even more beautiful once I get all the blue marks off of it. Next up, I will work on stitching my charm squares. It's now time to quilt my charm blocks. These are Fandangle, I think designed by Crystal Watson. They're gorgeous. Super happy, and it works really well with the thread. I'm going to quilt an X across each one of these, and then another, I'm going to quilt a double diamond. Basically, it's going to look like cross-hatching. I put the ruler foot on my machine. Now, when quilting on your home sewing machine with rulers, you need to have the right foot. Home sewing machines come in different heights. Some are low shank, some are high shank. There's a couple different options on that. So definitely talk to your machine manufacturer about what ruler foot is right for you. Westerly, Sew Steady, make them for your machine, for all machines, most machines maybe, even if your manufacturer doesn't make a ruler foot for your specific model. So find someone who sells Sew Steady, Westerly feet and rulers. So that's the first thing I need, is the right size foot. Then I need the right height ruler, because if your ruler is too high, whenever your needle and foot come down on it, it can jam your ruler bar. I mean your needle bar, your foot bar, whatever. Anyway, it's bad for your machine. Don't use the wrong size ruler. On my machine, the right size ruler is 1/4 inch, which is convenient because 1/4 inch is also the same size that I need for my long arm. Long arms are consistent. Standardized at 1/4 inch rulers with a standardized foot. Home machines are not. So definitely check with your manufacturer to make sure you have the right foot and the right ruler. The next thing you're going to need is ruler grip, because if I try to push the quilt using my ruler, the ruler moves, the quilt doesn't. I have Handi grip on here, and I can actually use it instead of one of my Batt Scooters. I have to remember that my foot presses my needle 1/4 inch away, so I want to put my needle in the corner. Now here, I want to come down 1/4 inch because I don't want to bind off my points. So I have to align my ruler 1/4 inch away from the edge to allow my needle to come into, to hit the corner. Some rulers have these tabs on them with a little line in them. This is a mini scallop ruler from Handi Quilter, and I can line it up with that extra line on the tab. Otherwise, you can eyeball it. You get pretty good at it over time. So needle down, needle up, pull up that bobbin thread. I'm going to baste the top while I'm here. And I'm going to stitch down 1/4 inch. That's pretty easy to figure out because my foot is 1/4 inch. So when my back of my foot is on the fabric back here, then I'm 1/4 inch away. I'm now going to put the ruler next to my foot and 1/4 inch away from the corner. Down, down, down on the corner. I have my my Batt Scooters because I hold one hand on the ruler, the other hand on my Batt Scooter. I'm gonna push the fabric while I stitch. And I am going to stop with my needle in the down position in the corner. I'm going to put my ruler next to the foot and set it up at the other end of my block so that my ruler is 1/4 inch away from my seam. And then I'm going to use my Batt Scooter in my other hand and stitch across. And I'm going to do that all the way down my quilt. Now that I'm down to my last block, I want to make sure, once again, that I don't quilt into the binding area. I have some 1/4 inch quilter's tape, and I am simply going to tape off my last 1/4 inch. And I will treat the intersection of the seam and the tape as my seam that I'm aiming for. And then I'll just stitch into the batting. I now have a zigzag going all the way down my quilt. So we're going to go do that again, just in the opposite side. Let's start up here. I'm once again on my last block, and I am going to stitch into the corner of the tape and the seam. Now I have an X in every block. I could stop here. The quilt is done. However, I believe that whoever puts the most thread on her quilt wins. And I'm going to go back up to the top. Trim some of these ends so I don't stitch over them. I'm just going to take a quilt marker and just a straight edge, and I am going to find where the center of that X is and mark a little mark on the side. I'm also going to find where that mark is at the top. Like with the free motion quilting, you can mark a block or two at a time, or you can mark the whole thing at once. So I'm going to start in this top center. Stitch down that 1/4 of an inch, so I'm not in my binding area, and I'm going to stitch a line. It's half the distance of the previous line from this mark to this mark. And then I'm going to stitch across from mark to mark. So that is 3 lines I've stitched. I'm going to go back all the way up to the top and stitch the last one the same way. Start in the middle. And now that the markings are done, this will be much quicker. So now that that's done, I have diagonal lines, stitching back and forth across each one of my charm squares. Peel off my tape. As I continue quilting my quilt, I'm going to do the free motion swirls with the stencil and the white, and then once I get to my squares again, I'm going to take that 1/4 inch seam tape. I'm going to baste down the edge, and then I'm going to cover it with the 1/4 inch seam tape just to remind me where my seam is so that I don't stitch into my binding. So I will complete the entire quilt the same way.